Between the years of 1966 and 1979, the Central African Republic was led by the political and military figure Jean-Bédel Bokassa. In the wake of a coup, he first assumed power as the leader of a military regime before announcing his indefinite presidency in 1972. Bokassa was renowned for his bizarre and opulent lifestyle, as well as for his harsh suppression of political opposition and violations of human rights. Later in 1979, he was removed from office forcefully in a military coup supported by France, and he fled to exile in France. In the Central African Republic's history, Bokassa's administration has drawn heavy criticism for being a time of dictation and abuses of human rights. In this video, we will be talking about the life of Jean-Bédel Bokassa and some of the tragic things he did, like the massacre of school children. Let's get on with it. His early life. Jean-Bédel Bokassa was born on February 22, 1921 in French Equatoria, Africa, which is known today as the Central African Republic. One of 12 children born to a village chief, Mindagan Bandulu, in the village of Pobangui. His father was murdered when he was 6 years old by representatives of a French corporation with economic ties to the region after he refused to continue using the locals as forced labor at the company's operations. Bokassa became the president and self-declared emperor of the impoverished Central African Republic. After his mother's suicide, not long after his father's death, Bokassa's father's family decided to enroll him in a nearby Christian missionary school. Bokassa was sent to another school in Brazzaville when the missionaries decided they couldn't convince him to pursue his dream of becoming a priest because he had the necessary skills and motivation. His family persuaded him to join the Free French Army in its struggle against the French Vichy collaborationist troops and the German army after he had graduated in 1939, which he did in May. He advanced fast through the army ranks, becoming a sergeant major in less than 2 years. He helped liberate Brazzaville from the Vichy and German forces. He was transferred to France in 1944. He remained in the army and was assigned to what was then French Indochina. There he took part in operations against Viet Minh guerrillas in Saigon. The French government honored him with several bravery medals for his exploits during these conflicts. Later, he was sent back to Brazzaville, where he was promoted to lieutenant and then captain. In 1960, Bokassa left the French army to join the Central African Republic's army, which was 2 years after the former French colony of Ubangi-Sheri gained independence. He eventually rose to the rank of colonel and was chosen by the Central African Republic's president, David Dacko, who was also his cousin, to lead the army. Despite the number of coups d'états that were happening in Africa at the time, President Dacko publicly dismissed the likelihood that Bokassa will try to remove him from power. At one official dinner, he said Colonel Bokassa only wants to collect medals, and he is too stupid to pull off a coup d'état. Bokassa rises to power. However, despite their family ties, Bokassa and Dacko started to argue. To combat the chance that Bokassa would stage a coup, Dacko created a 500-member gendarmerie and a 120-member presidential security guard, led by Jean Izamo and Prosper Munumbe, respectively. The nation was in upheaval due to poverty, ongoing insurgent incursions from nearby nations, and widespread corruption among local and national government leaders. Dacko planned to replace Bokassa with Izamo as his military advisor and wanted to promote army officers loyal to the government while demoting Bokassa and his close associates. When things between Bokassa and Dacko reached a breaking point in December of 1965, Bokassa ultimately organized a coup that succeeded in toppling Dacko. On January 1, 1966, he overthrew the government in the so-called Street Sylvester coup d'état, dissolved parliament, and declared elections would take place soon. Are you enjoying this video? Like and subscribe to the New Tourist channel. Also, turn on notifications so you get notified when we upload interesting content like this. Let's continue. The following months saw the implementation of some new laws by Bokassa, including the need that all males and females between the ages of 18 and 55 were to show proof of employment or risk being fined or imprisoned. Female circumcision, dowries, and polygamy were all outlawed. Begging and loitering were also banned. In addition, Bokassa funded the establishment of 2 national orchestras and created a public transportation system in Bangui that consists of 3 interconnected bus lines that run across the nation's main city, as well as a ferry service on the Ubangi River. Bokassa struggled to get his new government recognized internationally despite the country's improvements. To defend the coup, he claimed that Izamo and the People's Republic of China agents were attempting to seize control of the government, and that he had to step in to prevent communism from spreading. President Francois Tambalbaye of the neighboring Chad, whom Bokassa met at Buka Oam, initially granted him diplomatic recognition. Other African nations started to acknowledge the new administration diplomatically shortly after. The French initially resisted backing the Bokassa dictatorship, but the French officials were later persuaded that the coup was essential to prevent the country from destabilizing. Bokassa proclaimed himself president for life in 1972, and in 1974 he once more narrowly missed being deposed in a coup. In 1977, he proclaimed himself Emperor Bokassa I, changed the name of the nation to the Central African Empire. He had himself crowned in an ostentatious, lavishing coronation ceremony that most estimate to have costed around $20 million, while people outside the capital of the impoverished nation were starving to death and succumbing to disease. He also had properties in France. He had 17 official wives, many mistresses, and 55 children. France finally withdrew its support for Bokassa's regime due to the dire circumstances in the nation and the erratic and oppressive nature of his rule. Furious, Bokassa then turned to Muammar Gaddafi, the dictator of Libya, for assistance. Bokassa adopted Salah ad-Din Ahmed Bokassa as his new identity in a bid to win that support, but when the money Gaddafi promised never arrived, he reconverted back to Catholicism. Bokassa then resumed using his name. The French withdrew their support for Bokassa in 1979 after food riots broke out in the capital and Bokassa's forces opened fire on protesters, killing hundreds of them. Bokassa kills school children, leading to his downfall. He had issued an imperial proclamation requiring all students to wear a unique uniform featuring a portrait of him created in a factory run by one of his wives. After the kids staged a public protest, there was disorder. As the soldiers came in to put an end to the commotion, they eventually started shooting at the kids. 150 to 200 school children are thought to have died. After the elementary school students were murdered, the opposition to the government grew stronger, and by April, secondary and university students had begun a walkout. Following this, Bokassa ordered a roundup of dissidents in which hundreds of students were rounded up and taken to Ngaragba prison, where over the following few days, about 100 of them died from suffocation, torture, and murder at the hands of the guards. It was claimed that Bokassa personally participated in the majority of the torture and murder alongside the guards. When Bokassa was accused of these killings, he left the nation and made his way to the Ivory Coast via flight, before relocating to France. He lived there in exile for 4 years. He returned by plane to the Central African Republic in 1986. He was promptly detained and put on trial after being found guilty of murder in a trial conducted in his absence by the new administration in 1980 and sentenced to life in prison. He was released in 1993 during a general amnesty. Bokassa spent the rest of his life in the Central African Republic. He declared himself the 13th apostle and stated that he had covert meetings with Pope John Paul II in 1996 as his health began to deteriorate. At the age of 75, Bokassa passed away from a heart attack on November 3rd in his Bangui residence. Bedel Bokassa refused to enter a plea of guilty until his death, although numerous witnesses had testified regarding the killings and torture of students. He made an effort to place the blame for any wrongdoings that might have taken place during his rule as president and emperor on disloyal members of his former cabinet and the army. Bokassa was severely overwhelmed by power, such that by the end of his regime, he spent more time brutalizing his enemies than actually working on his development agenda. He had peasants massacred for protesting a hike in food prices and brutalizing people for drunkenness. He was an absolute tyrant. Nobody was spared from his wrath, not even his cabinet members. We have come to the end of this video. We hope you have been able to learn more about the Central African dictator Jean-Bédel Bokassa and his legacies. Are you from the Central African Republic? Let us know what you think in the comments section. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the New Tourist channel. Also turn on notifications so you get notified when we upload interesting videos like this. Thanks, and we'll see you in our next video.